Disclosure of information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. Every buyer of any interest in residential real property on which a residential dwelling was built prior to 1978 is notified that such property may present exposure to lead from lead-based paint, which may place young children at risk of developing lead poisoning. Lead poisoning in young children may produce permanent neurological damage, including learning disabilities, reduced intelligence quotient, behavioral problems, and impaired memory. Lead poisoning also poses a particular risk to pregnant women. The seller of any interest in residential real property is required to provide the buyer with any information on lead-based paint hazards from risk assessments or inspections in the seller's possession and to notify the buyer of any known lead-based paint hazards. A risk assessment or inspection for possible lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards is recommended prior to purchase. So if you are purchasing a home that is 1978 or older, you will see this disclosure. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. You'll see this first section, line 9 through 26 is for the seller. The seller's disclosure. The seller either is aware that the lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards are present in the residence and or included in the sale, or the seller has no knowledge of any lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the residence and buildings included in the sale. Please keep in mind every single real estate transaction is case by case, so these forms don't necessarily apply to everyone. Every single transaction is completely different. And as you continue on to section 2, you'll see where the buyer's acknowledgement is, lines 27 through 36. Buyer has read the information set forth and has received copies of the reports, records, and other materials listed above, if any. Buyer's initials are required. B, buyer has received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, also has a spot to initial. And then C, buyer has, and it says to check one, 2 boxes, either 1, received a 10-day opportunity or mutually agreed upon period to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. Or the other box, waived the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. Also has another spot to initial. I would never select that, as I wouldn't want your family to ever be in any kind of danger, and I would never ever advise anyone to select that. But each buyer has their own rights to do as they wish. But please think about these things before you make decisions in these transactions. And then finally, the third section, the agent's acknowledgement. Any real estate agent who is to receive compensation from the seller or the listing agent with regard to the transaction contemplated in this disclosure must initial below. It has the area for the agent to initial. Line 37 and line 38 states the agent whose initials appear below have or has ensured the seller's compliance under the Residential Resale Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 1992 by the seller's use and completion of this disclosure form. On line 40, certificate, and lastly, on line 40, certification of accuracy. By signing below, each signatory acknowledges that he or she has reviewed the above information and certifies that, to the best of his or her knowledge, the information provided by the signatory is true and accurate. There is a spot on the left for the seller's signature and the listing agent's signature, and there's a spot on the right for the buyer's agent's signature and the buyer's signature. And that is pretty much it. Please make sure you read thoroughly and ask as many questions as possible before you sign anything. Thanks, guys.